Ready? All right, guys, it's showtime! Woo! We welcome you to Dixie Crossroads. Thank you guys for coming tonight. Our MC for tonight, we're so lucky to have, is Commissioner Rita Pritchett. And we really appreciate all of the support of the county commission. And so Rita's going to be reading the cards and all that. And so for other elected officials that we have, starting in the back, coming from the south to the north, we got Mayor Frank Catino from Satellite Beach. And then from Titusville, we have Mayor Walt Johnson. And then we got 3 Titusville City Council members here tonight. We got Council Member Sarah Stokel, City Council Member Robert Jordan, and City Council Member Dan Diesel. And
Vice Mayor.
Vice Mayor, I'm sorry. Vice Mayor Dan Diesel. All right, and so I'm going to turn over the podium to Commissioner Pritchett. Thanks again for coming. Y'all need anything, let us know.
Somebody's going to be introducing her. Miss Laura Lee Thompson is amazing in Dixie Crossroads. Thank you for hosting this event. I want to officially welcome you here tonight. And you know what? It's so wonderful seeing all of you people that love the Lagoon so much, and we're so passionate about what we have going on in the community. The Lagoon is so important. You know, as an accountant, economically, this Lagoon is really important. But it's just the right thing to do of cleaning up the mess that we've made and trying to quit making so much mess in our environment. I have 8 grandchildren, and I'm excited about leaving them a nice planet here when I start getting ready to exit out. Real quick, I just have to say this. I look around the room and I see so many people's faces here that I really love. And I've known some of you my whole life. Danny used to beat up on me in the 5th grade on the playground. But so many of you I've just gotten to know over the past 6 or 7 years since I've gotten the privilege of doing this. And Mr. Roy's amazing, all you guys too. But Laura Lee and I used to play softball together. And I don't know if you know this, but I grew up with her, we called her Shorty Thompson. And she was one of the best catchers ever. We used to go to state and everything, so we have quite a history together. And I love this woman. I love her heart, and I love all the things that her and her family do. I had to say that because I just love Laura Lee so much. So without further ado, I would like to bring up to the front Miss M.J. Waters.
Thank you. It is so exciting to see so many people here tonight. We had a similar program down at Florida Tech a few months ago and filled the house there, and we're so excited to fill it here as well. We hope that you will get your questions answered and you will continue to seek information. We have some great organizations here with us tonight who can answer some of those and give you more information. On behalf of the Brevard Indian River Lagoon Coalition, welcome. The coalition is an independent, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works with community partners and citizens to help restore our Indian River Lagoon. We are really excited to bring you this opportunity to learn more about the progress that is being made with the Brevard County Save Our Indian River Lagoon Project Plan. You can tell a government group named that. We're also going to have someone speaking on updates to projects in North Brevard, and also, as Laura Lee mentioned, a way for you to get your questions answered. We all know that Brevard County has a plumbing problem. And it's obvious when you look at the quality of our water throughout the 156 miles of our lagoon. So the big picture is we have a lot of people. And with a lot of people come a lot of pollution. And you can see this from last year down in the southern part of the lagoon. And with a lot of pollution, we have a lot of problems. But the good news is we have plans. So how do we get this many people? How many people lived here in 1950? We had 23,000 people who lived in Brevard County in 1950. In 1970, we had 10 times that much. And you can guess what happened in between the 50s and the 70s. By 2014, we had over 500,000. And by 2050, it's going to be close to 1 million people in Brevard County. Now that's a lot of fertilizer, a lot of lawn mowing, a lot of dog walking, and a lot of toilets being flushed. And all that growth brings pollution and the many different ways it enters the lagoon. So we can't just think about fixing for the past, we have to think about planning for the future at the same time. So this is a picture to talk about some of the different ways that pollutants get into the lagoon. And what it tells us is there's no single fix. There is no one thing that we can do because it's a yes and problem. We have leaky septic tanks, and we have too much fertilizer and too much reuse water. We have stormwater runoff. We have septic systems that need, utility systems that are under repair. And we have a lot of stormwater problems, et cetera, et cetera. So if you hear somebody say there's only one thing we need to do to fix the lagoon, move on. That is not your person. There are other people who can explain the complexity of the problem. Tonight's program is about the plan and about the progress. We have a solid plan that's based on science and research to address each of these sources of trouble. Our community was smart enough to pass a sales tax in 2016 that is giving us almost $40 million a year to help restore our lagoon. And the county is only in a little after the second year of the plan. So it's still really early. Because people ask us every day, is it all better? And you know, it's not all better yet. The money is being spent wisely. We have a citizen oversight committee who watches out for how the money is spent and makes sure the decisions are transparent so that all of us know what's going on. Yes, there are debates about some of the nuances of the plan, but the big picture is the focus is on funding projects that will remove the nutrients harming the lagoon. That's what it's about, is stop the nutrients harming the lagoon, get them out and stop them from going in. Many projects are underway, some are completed, and a whole lot more are in the timeline. You're going to hear more about that from the director of the Brevard County Natural Resources Management Team in just a moment. But there's one thing missing from all of that, and that's you. Because what we do every day, believe it or not, has a huge impact on restoring the lagoon. One thing you can do is talk to people. Tell people you were here. Tell people what you learned about. Share information with your colleagues, your fellow employees, your neighbors. Practice responsible lagoon lifestyle. This is a card that the coalition put together, and there's a bunch out there that tells you simple things you can do, like take your car to a car wash. We don't want those soap suds going down the street. You know, little kids love it when you say scoop the poop. You'll get a laugh out of your grandkids every time you say that. It works for me anyway. So that's why we have to take our own responsibility. And that's what you've done as a first step in coming here tonight. The good news is that we, the people of Brevard County, value our waterways and we want to see them healed. It took 50 years of bad behavior for us to get where we are today. But the good news is we're headed in the right direction. So I will ask you to be patient. I know it's tough to be patient because that's what McDonald's has done to us. Before that, we couldn't just drive up to a window and say, I want a hamburger and get it in 60 seconds. So now it's like, well, hey, we passed a tax. How come the lagoon's not healthy in 12 months? You can blame McDonald's for that kind of thing. But it's really important that we stay the course and keep moving forward with your will and your support. And we will learn as we go and adjustments will be made, which is great. That's the way it was designed. So I'm going to now turn it over to Virginia Barker, who is going to talk to us about what's happening with the plan.
Okay, and thanks for everybody in the room. So how do we get to a healthy lagoon? We have our 4 R's. So like MJ said, we need to reduce the nutrients, the excess nutrients that are going into the lagoon, and that's a yes and problem. There are lots of different sources for those nutrients, so the plan addresses multiple different sources. Then we need to remove the excess nutrients that are already in the lagoon. If we were to stop all of the current pollution from those 500,000 people going into the lagoon today, the amount of muck that's in the lagoon that's accumulated from our past sins would still be there for the next 100 to 200 years, decomposing and releasing nutrients that are feeding algae blooms. So unless we also remove that muck, we will continue to have blooms, we could continue to have fish kills. So we have to do both of those things. Then we want to restore our filter feeders, because we had an incredible fishery of oysters and clams that were out there filtering the lagoon for us for free every day, and most of them are no longer there, so we've got to restore them. And then we're continuing to learn, and so the last R in the plan is to respond. Every year we look at lessons learned, we go back to that plan, and we update it with new information and new opportunities. Oh, there we go. So this is what the sources of nitrogen were in the lagoon back several decades ago. And the biggest bar here, the green, this is point sources. This was wastewater treatment discharges. And so we partially treated our wastewater. We treated it to make sure it was free of things that were a human health concern, but we released those nutrients back to the lagoon. And so that was the largest source of pollution. We stopped doing that in the 80s and 90s. There's very little of this going directly to the lagoon now, although you read about it after hurricanes and things. It gets a lot of attention. This is groundwater pollution from other sources, from all sorts of sources. This is septic pollution. This is the amount of pollution raining down from the atmosphere because we've polluted our air. And then we have stormwater runoff and muck accumulation. So this is from the 80s, 90s-ish. And then fast forward to, hit the right button, now. And you see what I was saying, our point source has gone way, way down, but groundwater pollution and septic pollution has increased. Atmospheric deposition has gone down a little because of the CAFE standards, the federal EPA standards for clean air that were adopted with 2020 goals. Car emissions have cleaned up, right? We have catalytic converters, all sorts of things that have helped reduce atmospheric pollution. And stormwater runoff, the county and all of the cities have been working for several decades now on stormwater treatment, and so that's reduced. But muck here has nearly doubled because we continue to put too much pollution in the lagoon. So the plan addresses fertilizer, nutrients in reclaimed water, septic systems, stormwater, and muck decomposition. And then through those annual updates, which we've done 3 of now in 2017, 18, and beginning of 2019, we've added repair of leaky sewer laterals, which were largely responsible for the large overflows of sewage we had after the hurricanes. A grass clipping campaign, help people understand what they need to do to keep their grass clippings out of stormwater. And then the last thing there is hooking up package plants to municipal wastewater treatment plants, because a lot of those old package plants have very low treatment levels and are releasing nutrients. We can do better than that. So I'm sorry the video didn't play. The video was like living proof that projects really are happening. So I might have to twist Lou's arm and get him to play that eventually. But this is a map of where projects have been constructed or are under construction or are under contract for permitting, design, engineering, or construction. So there are 15 projects that are completed. There are 8 that are underway. There are 34 more under contract. And then we have 11 contracts for monitoring the projects that are either completed or underway, so that we can find out exactly how effective they are at doing the job for which they were designed. And We track progress on all of these projects monthly, well now quarterly, with this table that is posted. Yes, the board just changed last month. So there's a row for every single project. This thing goes on for pages and pages, so I just clipped a little piece of it, but you can see where each project is in the process, because these are big, complicated, a lot of these are big, complicated projects. It takes a couple years to get the permits, and then the bidding and construction, and so you don't see turn dirt right away, but there is a lot happening behind the scenes. So this is just the Titusville area. This is a story map that's under, we're constructing this right now. It's not posted yet. And you can see all the different projects that are either underway, completed, or coming in the Titusville and the North County area. So in terms of responsiveness, we have performance measures for these projects to meet. We're monitoring those. We're using that data. We're using that science to make decisions to amend the plan in annual updates. All of that is overseen by both the Citizens Oversight Committee that MJ talked about, and then the Board of County Commissioners. And we try to post everything, and we have these monthly meetings that are televised so that it's very transparent. On the county's website, if you go to brevardfl.gov, G-O-V, there's a box on the upper right corner that Save Our Lagoon. You click on that and it'll take you to a whole bunch of information. Yes. Lagoon tax collections to date, we're at $99 million. Obviously, you don't see $99 million worth of projects constructed yet, because a lot of them are still in the permitting and design. But the value of projects that we have underway is over $126 million. So we are working on $126 million worth of projects right now, even though they're not all under construction yet. So some of that groundwater, some of the monitoring data that I was telling you about, and sorry, from the back of the room, you may not be able to see this. This is the level of nitrogen in our natural areas, very low levels. This is the amount of nitrogen that has been measured over 8 or 9 months now in areas that are served by septic. And data is collected by the Marine Resources Council and a contract with Applied Ecology. This is the amount of nitrogen in sewer areas. So there's a lot of push to move people from septic to sewer. And that's good, right? We want to go from this much pollution down to this much pollution. But then all that waste goes to the sewer plant. They treat it for pathogens. They reduce some of the nutrients, and then they got to do something with the water. They can't discharge it directly to the lagoon anymore, so they distribute it back out in irrigation lines. And so your people are watering their lawns with this water that still contains nutrients. So when those areas were monitored, these are the nitrogen levels in the groundwater. So if we go to all that expense, a couple $2 billion to convert all the septic tanks in Brevard to sewer, but we don't address the reclaimed water problem, we're not going to make any headway. So we also have projects to increase the treatment level at wastewater treatment plants so that our reclaimed water will be cleaner and not be polluting the lagoon. So just a reminder on septic tanks. So the septic tank, there's a little bit of treatment that happens in a septic tank, 0 to 10% nutrient reduction, then 10 to 30% in the leach field, in the drain field. But most of the reduction comes as that effluent then trickles through the soils down to the groundwater table and moves laterally. And so the bigger this distance is between the drain field and the groundwater, the more nutrient reduction happens. The better these soils are at slowing that down, the better the reductions are. The longer this distance is, the better your system will work. But if any of those 3 ingredients aren't good, then you've got a lot of nutrient pollution going to the lagoon. So we've modeled this for every septic tank in the lagoon watershed in Brevard County. This is a heat map of these colors are made up of zillions of dots, 53,000 dots that represent septic tanks. The red ones are the ones that are polluting the most. We then did a cluster analysis looking for where there are a bunch of red ones together. That's where we would do a septic to sewer project, because we don't have billions of dollars to convert every septic to sewer. We need to just go after the most important ones. The green areas are not as important. The red areas are. And so this is how the analysis is done that leads the plan. So by addressing 8% of the septic systems, we're going to reduce septic pollution by over a third, 35%. Muck reprioritization. In the last year or two, we've been working with researchers at Florida Tech to go out and measure the muck, where it is, how wide an area it covers, how thick it is. And so they do that with these poles. They started out with 20-foot poles, and then the muck was deeper than that, so they had to go back out to some areas with 30-foot poles. And then they also dive down and collect samples and look at the decomposition rate, the nutrients that are coming out of that muck. And we rank all the muck areas based on that decomposition rate. So that process allowed us to hone in on, we don't have to remove all the muck, we just have to remove the worst muck. So this is a sum of all the changes that have happened to the plan in the first 3 years. So we have reduced the recommended spending on muck removal by $91 million. That allowed us to take that $91 million and distribute it to other project types. $43 million of it went to, when we dredge that muck up, we remove the solids, but the liquid goes back into the lagoon where it belongs. But there's dissolved nutrients in that liquid. So we also, just like we want to clean the reclaimed water, we want to scrub the nutrients out of that, out of the liquid before it goes back to the lagoon. So that's what $44 million is going towards. And then we've also increased human waste related projects, septic and sewer type projects by nearly $70 million, increased stormwater by $30 million, a little bit more for shoreline restorations, either living shorelines, plants, or oysters, and a little bit more on outreach and engagement. So this is my final slide. We're in the rainy season. Somehow, June 1st hit, and the heavens opened up and the rain is falling. So the reason that there is a ban on fertilizer use during the summer is because the rain washes it off your yard, either into the groundwater or into the stormwater, into the lagoon. And so we have a summer ban underway right now. And with that outreach money, we've hired a firm, MTN, to develop, this is the sign that was distributed to all of the fertilizer sales folks last week. They also got training materials for their staff, and we are launching an entire outreach and engagement campaign in the next few months on fertilizer use, on septic maintenance, and we're hoping to work on grass clippings as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Eddie. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. What a great turnout. And thank you to Laura Lee and to MJ for having me as your speakers tonight. It's fantastic to be here. So I am Eddie Galindo. I work in the planning department, so I deal a lot with land use, but I'm also our city staff liaison to the Titusville Environmental Commission, reviewing projects and looking at impacts from the city in the lagoon and around us. So for my first slide, we've talked about baffle boxes at least once tonight. I want to know, show me your hand, who is familiar with baffle boxes? All right, keep them up, keep them up. How many of you are familiar enough with them that you can describe how a baffle box works to the person to your left? Okay, hey, pretty good, pretty good. Okay, so just really quickly, so that we're all on the same page on how a baffle box works and how it improves the water quality in the lagoon. A typical stormwater system is going to have a pipe that takes the rainwater and drains it out to a water body, and usually it's not treated in any way. The baffle boxes are a retrofit to try to improve the water quality by doing a couple things. You see on the left side of the box is where the water comes in at, and then there's 3 settling tanks. It's all one tank, but there's 3 settling chambers on the bottom, and it helps to capture some of the solids that get, or some of the sediment that gets carried into the water when it's being transported. And so that's why you see there's more sediment to the left, and then as it filters out, there's fewer and fewer sediments. And those sediments carry the nutrients that are polluting the lagoon. So it's important to remove the sediments as much as possible. And then there's also a basket up at the top that helps collect litter and leaf, things that would, that otherwise right now are just flowing out into the lagoon. And then there's chambers up at the top so that we can take our vacuum trucks to be able to empty those out periodically and basically restart the process all over again. So that's important because the majority of the projects that we're working on in Titusville are baffle box projects. And you'll see that we've got 4 basins. The South Street Basin has 3 baffle boxes. We've got the St. Teresa Basin, the La Paloma Basin, and then the Titusville High Basin. And I know a lot of you can't see the numbers on the screen tonight, but we do have high variability within those numbers. And it's important to remember that each site is, each baffle box is developed for the site, and so the costs fluctuate. It's not a set price for each baffle box. And then the other strategy that we're using here in Titusville is the floating vegetative islands. And that's basically a floating mat that allows grasses to grow on them, and it absorbs the nutrients that are in the stormwater pond so that there isn't enough nutrients to allow for the water to scum over. So we've got a floating vegetative islands at the senior center was already completed, but we've now got the Coleman Pond vegetative island. That was a $35,000 project.
Where is the Coleman Pond?
Good question. The Coleman Pond project is, do you know where Tennessee Street is? Kind of across the street from Parish,
Hospital.
from the hospital.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's not very visible, but
Okay,
you can
okay,
see it from
yeah.
the trail if you're riding your bike or anything
Right,
along
okay.
there.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
So these are the utility projects that are being funded by and will bring the nitrogen levels down to 6 milligrams per liter and the phosphorus down to 1 milligram per liter. So as a side note plug, property, please don't fertilize, you don't need to. The septic to sewer conversion, we've got 18 septic system sites that are higher priority that need to be addressed first, and so that's $660,000 going to convert those onto sewer. And then finally, we've got the smoke testing, which this picture doesn't show the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles smoking a Cuban cigar. It's how they test for leaks, basically putting smoke under pressure through the laterals, and then wherever they pop it, it shows where we might have a leak that we didn't know about. And so that's important, more so because if you think about leaks that get high priority, they're very visible, like if a pipe were to burst, that gets immediate headlines, people know about it and it needs to get fixed. Well, with a lateral leak, we may not know about it for years, and so that's years and years of leaking water. The map on the left shows the stormwater basins in the city, and the orange shows the basins that have a project currently underway or completed. And so you can see a majority of the basins have at least one project completed. Of course, we'd like all of them to have a project. And then the chart on the right shows in 2013, the blue number is our where we started from. It's the nitrogen and phosphorus levels that we had, and then the light blue is our goal. So the bar in the middle shows our current progress as of early 2018. The newer numbers haven't come out yet, but when they come out, our middle bar should be lower and closer to our target. And then eventually we'll have to meet our target all the way on the right in the next 3 to 5 years. Some extra ongoing projects. I know that tonight was supposed to focus on the Save Our Indian River Lagoon plan and projects that are being funded through that, but I did want to throw in a couple extra slides on just some other projects that the city's doing that we're either funding ourselves or with state dollars. We've got some shoreline protection ordinance that created some regulations for shoreline protection, shoreline structures. We've got a recommendation going to council to adopt the KBB, Keep Brevard Beautiful litter quitter. I think Brian's here tonight from KBB. There it is. So to reduce single-use plastics going into the lagoon. and help our restaurants start to go in a more environmentally friendly way. Storm drain markings, helping people realize that our stormwater system is directly connected to the Indian River Lagoon and that anything that flows down it is also going to be found out in the waters. And then street sweeping is huge, removing 3.3 million pounds of debris, just litters, again, some sediments that are carrying those nutrients. So when you see your street sweeper, honk, wave, because they're doing a great service to all of us. And then public outreach, making sure that people know that we're doing things and how they can help. And these are some other, more of the capital improvements type projects that are, again, not being funded directly from the Save Our Lagoon project, but other things that are important to keep in mind. The Drayfield Stormwater Park, if anyone hasn't been out there recently, very beautiful park. We've got our senior center floating islands, the same concept as the Coleman Ponds, and those are already out there, so you can go take a look. The littoral plantings also along senior center. And then we've got a living shoreline demonstration site, a pilot project. If you go to the end of Main Street, you'll see some mangroves, kind of small right now. They had to be replanted after one of the hurricanes. Yeah, it's kind of a blur, but attempting to show that strategy works for nutrient reduction and for resilience as far as protecting the shoreline from wave action. And then finally we have 5 projects, I think it's 5, maybe one got cut off, maybe not. But other baffle boxes that have already been put in place. St. John's Street Basin, the Main Street Basin, the Sycamore Basin, and the Knox-McRae Basin. And with that, Laura Lee.
So, I get to talk about one of my favorite places in the world, and that's the Titusville Causeway. And when we were little, we grew up, my grandfather ran the Titusville Fishing Pier, and my dad had a little boat dealership next to the causeway, and so I've been hanging out on the causeway literally since I was about 2 years old. So, we're going to start here. Alright, so this is what the north side of the east end of the Titusville Causeway looked like during Memorial Day weekend. It looks like this every day during the summer on the weekends. The construction and pavement in the foreground are the coast-to-coast bike trail, and it will eventually connect St. Petersburg Beach to Playa Linda Beach. And that bike trail is going to add a whole nother dimension to Titusville's recreational offerings. The causeway provides access to the water for people who can't afford a riverfront home or a boat to go out on the water. They come from all over Central Florida to enjoy the water. They even come from other coastal communities because we have a beach along the north side of our causeway. We enjoy the last large public beach that remains on a Brevard County causeway. The other causeways are lined with rocks. This is lagoon commerce at its best, and Titusville has a captive audience. We could have twice the economic impact, but this is what the south side of the east end of the Titusville Causeway looked like at the same time. Mom drove me. She went one way and we filmed it, and then we came back and filmed it going the other way. These poor people are climbing over construction rubble to reach the water. Their tents and umbrellas are set up by boulders. Along this section, the angle of the slope and the erosion at the bottom is so bad you have to be a mountain goat to get to the water. And there's going to be a barge coming up. All right, here's where you got to be a mountain goat. And then we got this barge coming up. Pay attention to this barge because it's going to show up again later. And then we're going to get to the little teeny tiny section on the south side where you don't have to climb over rocks to get to the water. Wow, look at all the people that were there. The highway had an unending stream of cars moving in both directions. Happy cars full of people heading east to the beach, and sad cars heading back west after they got turned away from the seashore because the parking lots were full. There's no question that some of those disappointed people would have jumped at the chance to stop on the south side of our causeway instead of going and looking for another beach. But wait, they can't because the south side of our causeway is covered with construction debris. Some manner of recreation takes place on the Titusville Causeway all year long. Jet skis and stand-up paddle boards prevail in the summer. Did I miss a slide? Yeah. So there's the jet skis and the paddle boards. Kayaking is a year-round event. Fall, winter, and spring bring the wind chasers. They watch the weather, and when it's forecast to blow, windsurfers and kiteboarders swarm on our causeway, renting box trucks in Orlando to haul their gear to the coast. Fishing is another year-round activity. Most of the fishing takes place on the causeway's south side. This is what they have to climb over to go fishing. You won't see birds like these on the other causeways. They need beaches where they can feed. Sometimes there's hundreds of black skimmers loafing on our causeway, which has become a well-known destination for birders and wildlife photographers. There's a half a dozen species of shorebirds in that picture on the right, along with gulls and terns. Oh yeah, and there's all the trucks and vans that the windsurfers and kiteboarders brought. And there's horseshoe crabs there too. And there's horseshoe crabs. Titusville Causeway was chosen to be a monitoring site for horseshoe crabs this year. This is the first time horseshoe crabs have been counted on Florida's east coast. It's been going on the west coast for a while. Our causeway is one of the most significant horseshoe crab nesting areas in the entire state. With no tidal influence here, our crabs spawn when a stiff wind blows perpendicular to the causeway, and they use the wind and the waves to get higher up on the beach to lay their eggs. Here we go. Okay. So this is why I think there's so many horseshoe crabs in the north end of the lagoon. This is a map of the shorelines of Brevard County. And so red is seawall, and yellow is riprap and rocks and construction debris. And you look down in the south end of the county there, and green is good. Green is a natural shoreline. So you don't get a whole lot of natural shoreline until you get down to the South Beaches area, and then there's like a little section along the north of the Pineda Causeway along the Banana River where you got green. And then up here in the north end, look at that, look north of Titusville. And the federal lands don't show up on this map, because they're not covered by the county, but the federal shoreline, this would all be green too, if it did show. So that's why we have so many horseshoe crabs up here. Horseshoe crabs need beaches to lay their eggs on, and we still have a lot of natural shoreline up here. What a difference a year makes. Look at how the causeway's been chewed up. So this was right after Irma. This was like five or 6 months after Irma. And you can see this big escarpment here. This is where Irma chewed it up. And this is like a 5 or 6 foot drop here. And somebody came in, the county or FDOT, somebody came in and they put a bunch of dirt here and they put sod on top of it. But that escarpment was all the way to the road. The road is right here. It chewed the causeway up almost to the road. So this was in 2018, and then they put the sand in, but the sand didn't stop the erosion. I mean, look at that. Remember the barge I mentioned? Well, that barge has been drifting around on the causeway for about a year now, but it finally stopped drifting and it settled in one place, where you saw it in the video. But look what happened. Look at that. The barge stopped the power of the waves, and then the sand that's being carried around in the waves just kind of settled down behind the barge. It's incredible. And look at this. You can see that light pole there. It had dirt around it in February, but it's getting chewed up. And then by the time we got to April, this pole was standing in water. And then you can see where the cut is. So even after April the 13th, the causeway just kept getting chewed up, to where it looked like that. And then the barge came. So that barge hasn't even been there a month. And this has happened, this sand has accreted behind that barge in less than a month. And so that's an example of what might happen on our causeway if we put some wave attenuation devices. And so to close, when springtime winds blow hard enough to entice the wind chasers to head for our coast, this also takes place right there, as it has for millions of years. That's the oldest animal on Earth. And when stiff breezes draw horseshoe crabs and wind-seeking humans, the resulting waves relentlessly gnaw away at our causeway shore. We must intervene, or we will lose an economic amenity and a haven for wildlife that's been a part of our community's culture ever since the causeway was built. And so now I want to introduce Chad Richard, and he's here from DRMP, and he is helping out with a feasibility study to actually determine whether wave attenuation devices might be a good solution for stabilizing the shoreline on our causeway. Thank you.
So it's always challenging to follow Laura Lee in a presentation in this manner, especially when it's in her own restaurant. So please bear with me as I work through my portion of the presentation, but I'm very hopeful that you come away with it from an information and educational standpoint. So obviously there's an issue. Laura Lee has introduced this topic. I'm sure as locals, you've seen the southeast portion of the causeway has experienced substantial degradation. That degradation can be considered from an ecological perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, and almost everything in between, recreationally too. So Laura Lee has hammered home these issues, and we are here to consider some options for a long-term approach that we believe would be better, longer lasting than riprap that has been placed along the tow line of the shoreline. I understand that it has a function, but as I think I can demonstrate here today, what we have done from a maintenance standpoint doesn't appear to have lasting effects. This photo I took a month and a half ago. And so unfortunately, that shoreline, because it's been exposed to so much damage, ecological damage through long fetch and through use, it is subject to a lot of erosion even during minor storm events, especially when you have a south-facing fetch. So what is fetch? I'm going to use that a few times. So fetch is basically the amount of energy that's associated with wind-driven acceleration of water as you go into an area. And there's going to be a graphic up here that will talk about why the Titusville, will demonstrate rather, why the Titusville Causeway in this stretch is so susceptible to south wave action and wind. So these images were taken on the same day, and so that riprap, that concrete riprap, which includes tires and a varied amounts of other construction-related concrete debris, is what's being used to help protect the shoreline, and it has done that. But unfortunately, it gets undermined in large storm events, and it is not prone to lasting through significant storm events, including minor hurricanes. So what does the feasibility achieve? What does it get there? This is not a funded for construction yet. We thought that it would be very valuable to do a due diligence report and come up with options for the county and others to consider and vet these options in a scientific and engineering practice, including wave modeling and a lot of other considerations. So shoreline protection from southern fetches and major storm events. Obviously we have to get beyond this. When we have significant events, it would be very damaging if 406 were cut in half from a storm. It's very costly whenever you have a section of pavement that's lost, and now you have a new bike lane to add to the mix. So if you were to have a section like that that would need substantial repair, it can be very expensive. Recreational use of sandy beach and shallow water. It's important to the residents, not only just the residents of Brevard County, but everyone else that comes to enjoy Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. So shallow water beach areas have been seen as a desirable community that people enjoy using, and we want to promote those shallow beaches for more use. Habitat restoration to benefit fish and wildlife. A living shoreline is a very productive ecological system, and those intact shorelines have a density and diversity curve of wildlife that exceeds most systems, especially in an estuarine environment. And seagrass restoration. This opportunity, as we'll get to, whenever you have a living shoreline and you have a breakwater array, which we're about to segue into that, promotes seagrass restoration, and we should all appreciate and understand, hopefully, that seagrass is vital to the IRL. And without a diversity and density of seagrass, we will continue to likely see a deterioration of the IRL from an ecological standpoint. So we talked about fetch. Look at this model. At the very top, where the pinnacle comes in, is the Titusville Causeway. You can see at 168-degree southern wind that you have a 30-kilometer fetch, which is the longest in the IRL. So when you have southerly winds that are forcing up, there is a lot of opportunity to have very high energy waves hit the shoreline. So 2 months ago, we did a hydrographic survey, which is like bathymetry. It's an underwater survey, right? We collected new data because understand that this is a dynamic system. The IRL is not static. It changes after every storm, perhaps even after every season. So we wanted real data to look at, to evaluate the survey and understand what the sands in the areas are around this area. So this is our focal area. So in addition to it being the hydrographic survey, this should be considered the project area for the feasibility report. Also performed a seagrass habitat survey through sea and shoreline. Did several transects. I was out with the gentleman that day conducting the survey. Unfortunately, there is not much seagrass there. However, the habitat is prone, and we know that seagrass has been successful within this area before. So as I mentioned before, this proof of concept is such that we can set a stage of critical success such that you would have the opportunity for more seagrass in certain areas of the causeway. So what are wave attenuation devices? You're going to hear this WAD word a lot. And basically it's a breakwater reef. It's hollow. It's three-dimensional, and it has the ability to make substantial differences through dissipation of wave energy before it hits the shoreline. They also, after a very short amount of time, and there'll be some more graphics to demonstrate it, basically become a reef structure. It's very common in Florida and other parts of the southeastern coastal plain for structures to be placed offshore as artificial reef habitat, because unfortunately we've lost a lot of our reef habitat. And so these actually become a living aquatic area that add value to the fishery and add value to all the different dynamics within those flow chambers. So this is the video that doesn't play?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have another video that did play, unfortunately. But what this basically demonstrates is that you can already see, even without the video, and we have another one to demonstrate it, is that on the right-hand side, you see the wash, right? On the left-hand side, that's the direction of the wave energy, and you see far less wash on the other side. I have another video to demonstrate as well. This was taken during Hurricane Joaquin. So actually, I went out and visited one of the most recent projects that was designed over in Cockroach Bay in E.G. Simmons Park. And I was very impressed with how quickly oysters and other benthic critters adapted to this area. And it has created an amazing backwater area that reminds me a lot of the Titusville Causeway. Prior to the breakwater reefs being installed, use in this area was very low. The shorelines were degraded. There was not accrual of sand. Basically, you had a very steep ravine as it went down. So after the WADs were installed, it has come back, and recreational usage in this area is at a peak. So here's just another example of what they look like. As I mentioned, they're three-dimensional. One interesting thing about WADs, though, is after they're deemed successful, or if slight changes need to be made, you design something, you think you got everything figured out, and then Mother Nature proves you wrong, right? They are mobile. You can pick them up and move them and slightly rearrange them. Unlike large riprap or even granite structures, it's very challenging to pick those up and move them if you didn't make a 100% design solution. And I hope no one in this room expects a 100% design solution when you're dealing in ecological restoration. So just another example of what they look like in the field at E.G. Simmons. And this is the video in Delaware.
So that's, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Pastor.
That does something with the waves as far as controlling the waves so that they don't hit the shoreline? Is that the purpose?
Yes,
What you're
ma'am.
talking about?
Yes, that's a good way of talking about it. So it has a dissipation. They don't refract energy, they kind of absorb energy in the way they're designed. As the water travels through, it has this absorptive capacity. So that's what it does. Essentially, during high energy storm events, you would not have those heavy waves crashing on the Titusville shore causeway. Yes, ma'am. So after a few years, this is what you may or may not have, right? It becomes a living barrier reef. So I just wanted to share with you as well that although I'm a scientist in the private industry, I have a vested interest. For a long period of time, I recreate on the IRL, and it's very important to me that we have a productive estuary and that we have the ability to recreate with our children, with our grandchildren, with our families, and bring everyone to this area. And we all probably remember what it used to be. And I would like to think that during my career and through the tenure of my children, that I can bring them back to the IRL and they can enjoy what I once enjoyed, and I want to see that again during my career and beyond. Thank you.
All right, so pretend you're at a play. This is intermission where we change the scenery.